Good afternoon everyone. Thank you for joining us for our April webinar on the subject of put and call options. Some of you will have a great deal of knowledge, I'm sure, in relation to this, and some will have basic knowledge. I'm going to deliver this webinar at the fairly basic level, but I'm bringing some concepts that are more advanced as we advance through the webinar itself. So before we get started, I would like to just poll the attendees to so you can tell us a little bit about yourself. First question is, what segment of the industry are you from? And we have a number of different... all right, okay, answers are coming through now. We will keep that poll open for just a little bit longer to get further responses in from the attendees. Okay, so I'll close that poll now, and you'll see there that we have quite a deal of real estate people, property marketing, legal and finance. Excellent, that's great. Thank you for providing that information. It just helps us tailor how we will deliver the information to you today. Now, as the second poll, I would like to know, if you don't mind, what best describes your role, and if we can just have your responses there to let us know if one of these categories meets your particular position. Okay, answers are coming in, that's great. I'll just leave that open there for another minute or so while the answers come in. It's really good to get this feedback so we know who we're talking to and how we can help, and how we can determine whether or not you think put and call options are something that are good, bad, and could be even better. Okay, we'll close that poll off now. And you'll see there that we have a high proportion of business owners. That's good to see, and a number of people in the sales and admin roles. Well, everyone needs to know about how put and call options works and what they're about. They do have some complexity about them. That's why we don't see them every day. And so it's good to see that we've got a good proportion of people down to admin involved there, because often it's the admin people who have to manage some of the ups and downs that are associated with this type of selling. Okay, now just start with the basics. What is a put and call option? If anyone wants more details than I'm about to tell you now, if you go to the blog on Carter Kaplan Law website, we've got a very highly, or even if you just Google put and call option Queensland, you'll get directed to a page on a website that explains this in greater detail. I think it's the world's top ranking web page on put and call options, believe it or not. Okay, so a call option, let's start with the first part. A call option allows a grantee to buy. In other words, the buyer can say to the seller, okay, you gave me an option for $1 to buy your car or a block of land. I'm exercising that option now within the terms of the option period and according to the manner specified in the option agreement. And you must sell to me as specified in the option agreement at the price specified in the contract, which is annexed to the option agreement. So that's the call option. Often they're extended out for lengthy periods, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. So the grantee or ultimate buyer, one of the seller hopes, will be someone who calls on the seller to sell in accordance with a contract that's annexed to the option document. That's the call option. Option fee, usually $1. That's all it has to be. That has to be some valid consideration. A put option is where is what happens, is what is allowed for in the option document where the grantee or buyer does not exercise their option. Everyone expects them to exercise the option at the time it's documented, but if market conditions have changed, for example, the grantee might not wish to exercise the option. So what happens then? The documents have allowed for this in advance by including a put option. This is the option of the grantor or seller to put the property into the lap of the grantee or buyer. In other words, to compel the sale, to put into train the contract that is annexed to the contract simply by exercising the put option. Usually an option agreement specifies that the call option must be exercised by a call option date, as I said, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years hence. That's the call option exercise period. And then after that time, a period is allowed for the grantor or seller to exercise their put option. So that is usually 14 days or 28 days after the exercise of the call option period. So within that time, the grantor or seller must follow the process specified in the option agreement to put in train the sale contract that is annexed to the option agreement. Usually that simply encompasses sending a notice to the grantee that because of the call option wasn't exercised, the seller or grantor is exercising the put option. So that's it in a nutshell. That's how it works. But that simplicity somewhat belies the complexity that is often contained in the documents and the steps required to be followed, and the somewhat complex nature of the documentation that is necessitated in land transactions relating to vacant land on the one hand or apartments. Put and call options can apply in any part of commerce, shares, goods, or anything else. But as you may have gathered, and I'm sure appreciated when you signed up for this webinar, this address is concerned with the application to land contracts. So the put and call option, we'll deal with this in a bit further detail further down the slides, but the essential is the option document itself, which is a customised document that deals with the intricacies we've discussed, and it annexes the contract which will be enlivened by the exercise of one of the options. It also annexes usually a personal guarantee on behalf of the directors of the buyer if it's a company or trust, and it has various annexures that deal with compliance issues if required. I might add here that if it's possible for nothing to happen in relation to a put and call option, if the buyer doesn't exercise the call option and the seller doesn't exercise the put option, nothing happens. That's the end of the matter, and there's no conveyance or ability to compel the conveyance of the property at that point. Okay, just another poll here. If we can ask readers to tell us if you are a regular reader of our monthly e-news. We have 2 subscribers. We have subscribers a monthly news service where we bring them up to date with recent developments in property practice, including decisions of the Supreme District Court of Queensland and sometimes New South Wales. So it's a very popular series, so just curious to see how many of those attending are readers of that or recipients of it and who are not. Okay, I think we've got all answers in now. Okay, so we've got a good proportion of you who are regular readers. That's good to see. We'll try and keep the content up to date, relevant, topical, and most importantly, relevant and readable. Okay, moving on. What purpose do put and call options serve? Well, they're really not a great deal of purpose usually, unless there's a long-term transaction. So they're usually employed where there's a long-term settlement. And one of the advantages, and not necessarily a purpose, but an advantage of this transaction structure is to defer stamp duty. I mentioned that usually the option fee for the put option, for the call option is $1, and the option fee for the put option is also $1. So the stamp duty on $1 is negligible. Whereas if the subject matter of the option was a $2 million property, the stamp duty is considerable, and there would be a significant commercial disadvantage to a grantee or buyer signing up and paying stamp duty 2 years before settlement on a $2 million property. As we've seen, the put and call option can achieve the same result as a sale. It doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily a sale document, and it's not treated like that under current thinking for stamp duty purposes, hence the stamp duty advantage. The other advantage that they serve is arbitrage. In other words, it's often the case that the grantee expects a market to improve, and hence they will be able to offload the property under the put and call option by the time it's put to them to buy, by the time they exercise the call, at a higher price. Now, and that is because there's usually a facility, it doesn't have to be, but most put and call options contain the facility for the grantee to nominate another buyer. So that's very essential to the purpose of modern put and call options, unless the only purpose were to defer stamp duty for a long settlement. So the nomination clause allows the grantee to, by notice to the grantor, nominate that there will be someone else who will, in whose name the contract annexed to the option will be entered into. Of course, the option will contain usually a guarantee on the part of the grantee that they guarantee the due and punctual performance of the nominee. So, and you can see there that by allowing the nomination provision, by allowing nomination in a put and call option, there is less overhead in terms of stamp duty and avoiding double stamp duty, or minimising the potential of double stamp duty in the case of on selling something. And it also, there is only the necessity of one transfer to be registered. It doesn't have to go into the name of the grantee in the titles office and then into the name of the nominee. So put and call options provide provide flexibility for long-term settlements. They allow deferral of stamp duty for long-term settlements, but in the case of arbitrage, they allow a low overhead environment within which to create the on-sale to the ultimate buyer. Now let's see what polls we have here. For those of you who have already engaged in put and call process, I'm sure all of you have had some experience with it, what features of the process would you like to see improved in relation to put and call transactions. So we're getting some good responses coming in now. Now, judging by the fact that there are a lot of marketers, business owners and financiers and agents attending, I'm assuming what we've been talking about is right on the money in relation to the type of transactions you've been involved in. But what features of the process would you like to see improved in relation to put and call options from your experience? Okay, we can close that poll off in a moment. Still answers coming through. And there are the responses. Okay, so most want to see the contract sign-up expedited, and most want to see simple documentation. All right. Well, that's a given, and that's what we're trying to do. But the put and call environment does have some. It does have an additional layer of documentation. So it's not necessarily the feature of the put and call nature of the transaction which dictates the extent of the documentation or the slow sign up. Often that's a feature of the environment in which it is used. For example, off the plan sales, which are, I would suggest, the cause for the heavy-handed documentation and the slow speed in signing contracts up. Okay, so let's look at some of the applications for put and call options. Firstly, let's look at some of the builder's put and call option situation. Okay, so we have a builder who has a relationship with the developer. They sign up for several blocks with the developer. The builder gets, they contract by way of put and call option with the nomination. Now, that allows the builder to market the property. They've secured it at a particular price that they think is attractive, and they can market the property to potential customers while the plan is being sealed, etc. So that gives a builder some certainty, it gives them some stock, it allows them to go into the marketplace or get people, or to have people do it for them to secure customers for their product. So, and then, as you may have gathered from, it's simply a question of the builder then nominating the customer as the buyer. Of course, there must be sufficient documentation. There must be documentation between the builder and their customer. The put and call option doesn't accommodate that. Put and call option is solely as between the grantor and the grantee, but allows this flexibility. The builder must obviously have its own documentation with its customer, who it then nominates to the developer as the buyer who completes the purchase from the developer. Now, as I'm sure many of you know, the consequences of the put option, in other words, if in this case, the builder does not exercise the option to buy, for example, they can't find a customer at the particular price they've agreed to pay the developer will put it to them and they must settle themselves at the agreed price by the due date specified in the documents or the contract annexed to the option. So the notice will be given by the grantor seller that here's the put option, you're deemed to enter into the contract next to the option. Settlement under that contract is 21 days. Settlement will happen in Brisbane on the 21st of May. Please front with the $450,000, which is the agreed price. So that's how it works. Of course, if the builder is able to on-sell the land at $500,000 to its customer, the builder pockets the $50,000. That's the advantage. That's the upside to a put and call option. We'll talk a bit more about that as we move on to the next example. Marketers put and call options. Same thing. Marketer signs up with the developer. Usually, and this can relate to apartments or land. It doesn't have to be off the plan. We'll talk about some of the issues related to off the plan in a moment. But if a developer has a project and they choose to use the services of the marketer, they may provide the marketer with some incentive by giving them the right to purchase a property, purchase a number of lots at a particular price with the ability for the marketer to on-sell at a higher price. Of course, the marketer takes a risk. If they can't on-sell, they must settle at the agreed price themselves by the date of expiration of the contract entered into by the exercise of the put option. So it works in the same way. The marketer nominates their customer as buyer, who completes the purchase from the developer. Of course, there must be documentation as between the grantee marketer and the customer, and the marketer has to work out a way to protect its share of profit when the settlement occurs. Usually that is no problem, but it has to be properly accommodated for in the marketer's put and call. So the risk to the marketer is that they can't on-sell and they must complete themselves. And I don't know whether any of you have had particular experience, but there have been plenty of cases, they're still coming through, where marketers, particularly who had settlements due in 2011, 2012, 2013, just couldn't get the buyers, couldn't complete, and a lot of weeping and gnashing of the teeth transpired as a result of those failed settlements. So I think that covers the essentials of a marketer's put and call. Marketing, of course, is a large part of property development in Queensland these days. It's entirely different to regular real estate sales. That's not to say put and call options can't be used in regular real estate sales for the sale of an established house in Paddington, Chelmer or wherever. It can be, but the need that a buyer would have to use that structure would be probably different to what we've been talking about today. Let's talk about off-the-plan considerations in relation to land. How do the off-the-plan considerations work in with a put and call transaction structure? Well, we all should know, if we don't, we should know the off-the-plan requirements relating to vacant land as they changed from 1 December 2014. If you don't know, you can look on the Carter Capital Law website for our webinar, which was in March 2015, which exactly on point. But as I mentioned before, one of the documents in the paper stack, one of the components of the paper stack relating to put and call options are documents relating to compliance. So off-the-plan sales have a greater overhead compliance than do titled lots. So obviously the off-the-plan document must contain must meet the requirements in relation to disclosure in put and call situations, just as they do in other situations. And you might, just as a refresher there, a disclosure plan is required unless it's 5 or less lots in an off-the-plan sale. Disclosure plans are usually something that require considerable surveyor input, and hence there's some particular compliance requirements there. The other thing to note in relation to off the plan is that there's a sunset date of 18 months, and we'll draw your attention to the significance of that a bit further on. Okay, off the plan considerations for apartments. As in the case of regular off the plan apartment sales, there are lots of disclosure requirements. So you must have the disclosure plan, specify the 5.5-year sunset date, specify the contributions, annex the body corporate management agreement and the service agreement and the letting management terms, annex the CMS and particulars of the applicable regulation module. So off the plan does not simplify the compliance process. Just a refresher there in relation to the disclosure plan in these situations. Sunset date for off the plan sales is 5.5 years. Now that's a good length of time. That's expanded as from 1 December 2014. So you can have a sunset date of up to 5.5 years. Under the new rules in relation to land and apartments, the maximum deposit is now 20%. So that's a fact to include in your documentation of any of the plan sale, and also those which entail a put and call option structure. So we might just pause there for another poll. You can give me an answer to what best describes your experience with off-the-plan sales to date. We'll see if we can come up with some ways to improve that experience. Okay, answers are coming in now. Now I've made the point that the put and call element to off-the-plan sales does not reduce the paper stack. It just creates that flexibility as mentioned before. You can nominate another buyer. You can defer stamp duty. It allows arbitrage, builders, marketers. Okay, got some good response to that. I'll show you what the responses were. Okay, overwhelmingly negative. 22% no problem, that's excellent. But for the remaining 75%, it's an unsatisfactory process. All right, now as we move on, what are the risks of an of a put and call option to a developer? Because it's a long-term contract, now this is whether it's off the plan or not, we're just talking about put and call. Longevity is always a problem in property transactions. Markets can move, finance approvals can lapse. If, of course, you have the luxury of having a grantee or a buyer who does not require finance, that's not an issue. You just wait out the time. But as we all know, that's really the case. So that is an issue when you're thinking about all put and call situations, because of usually an extended time period, that longevity creates the risk of market movement or finance lapsing. The other risk is it's important to have the finance approval from the developer's side, to have the finance approval only in the option, not in the contract. So the last thing a developer wants is an option to be exercised that's conditional on finance. That's just a no-no. In practice, if a finance approval is lapsed, it often occurs in a de facto way, but if there's no finance out in the contract, the developer can still access the deposit under the contract by way of default. So that's an advantage to the developer there. Make sure you keep your finance approval in the option only. Compliance issues, that's another risk when a contract's entered into, particularly if there's been a nomination, all compliance issues must be addressed. So it's important there to have robust documentation that the option agreement addresses all issues in relation to nominations concerning compliance and the giving of Land Sales Act disclosure notices, etc. So they're the risks to the developer. If put and call options fall over because of finance, then new documentation has to be entered into. That's also somewhat of an overhead to developers that should be borne in mind. Risk to grantee, to marketers, and to builders to some extent, deteriorating market conditions, as we saw throughout those years I mentioned. Many marketers not able to settle on their contracts, unable to find buyers. Interstate buyers are also a risk. Lawyers interstate don't understand this process at all, and finance approval. So that risk applies to the grantee, who are acting in the role as on seller to the ultimate buyer. Now, I might just mention here that it's timely to talk about the Property Occupations Act Form 8, and this applies equally in terms of put and call sales and the builder in between and the marketer who's acting as grantee on selling. All the on-sellers and the original developer must comply with the Property Occupations Act in relation to disclosure. You know this as the repealed 27C. Well, as I've been saying for some time now, the new Act did not deliver everything that was promised in terms of the abolition of 27C. All that has gone is an agent is not required to disclose their commission or the rate of their commission. Agents must still disclose other benefits they receive and benefits anyone else receives. Property developers must disclose. So property disclose, that's just agents. Moving on to the next category, property developers must disclose the identity of all benefit recipients and entities and the amount of such benefits. So that's what the developer must disclose. A marketer would usually be an agent, so they must disclose all benefits received by all other entities, runners, etc., financial planners or whatever. Property developers, the disclosure requirement is more stark. Marketers who are simply acting as sellers and have someone else sell their property for them in the on-sale process, it's that agent who has the disclosure obligation if the marketer is not a property developer. So that's the consequences of the disclosure. That's a requirement of the disclosure obligations under the POA Form 8. Okay, we're drawing to a close now. I hope this has been informative for you. I just might mention one of the features of of what we have on offer for developers. So before we do that, the paper stack, there we are, that's a summary. You need the option document, the Form 8, contract, special conditions, and all the annexures. So the paper stack is not any smaller when it comes to put and call options. So I just want to talk just for 1 minute about a feature we have at Carter Capital Law relating to a new way to deliver off the plan contracts in a marketing situation or an agency situation, or even developers for that matter. Consider for a second what would be the sign-up life of the sale of an apartment building under construction, for example, at Broadbeach. We saw from the polls before that slowness, messiness, finance, buyers dropping out are all problems that every marketer and agent has in relation to off-the-plan sales. why can't an off-the-plan sale be the same as any other sale that occurs where the buyer signs up in the agent's office on a Saturday afternoon on the spot? Okay, so that's definitely not the case. Here we have a 25-day lifetime in just getting the contract signed. If that can occur, sometimes it's easily twice that. Going through expression of interest, contract instructions through the hands of various solicitors, and eventually the buyer returns the contract maybe. So we can't do away with the solicitor requirements, but what we can do is make sure that the developer end or the marketer end is satisfied by online delivery of the exact documentation for that lot that is required for the marketer, developer or agent in their office that Saturday afternoon, simply by entering certain data online, and out comes the documents that they need to get the buyer to sign. Wouldn't that be a great idea? Conversion of prospects obviously would be more in line with the model of the traditional funnel. Wouldn't that be great to have your sales funnel work like that? So what we have developed is a system where we can deliver the documents immediately, and if there is access to a solicitor that the buyer can see immediately, and there are plenty of those around, there's no obstacle to the buyer signing up on the spot. Think about that. Okay, so just to finalise on that, so the agent will staff and generate and print lot-specific solicitor-approved compliant documents for the first or subsequent prospect on each lot in the development. And allow us the buyer to sign on the spot or present to an e-buy conveyancer for immediate advice. Okay, can I just ask for one final item of feedback? Can you please let me know if you can see any benefits of those listed from online contract delivery? Okay, we're starting to get some answers coming in now. Remember, it's a regimented system through a process that requires only certain variables: buyer's name, price, finance period to be inserted. Everything else is pre-completed in accordance with the developer-approved documentation for that project, delivered to your printer while the prospect is in the sales office. Okay, well, that's a certainly promising response. So if any of you would like any further information on that process, please don't hesitate to contact me, and we'll give you a demonstration.